And welcome back to episode number 63. 62 hasn't even come out yet. I'm going to release that. I was going to
Teaser,
release it
teaser.
today. I was going to release it today, but then schedule changes and we're recording tonight.
Yes.
But your two co-hosts tonight, Matt Couture here with Benny Ballgame Dearth. Zach is away for work, so he's not available tonight. But it'll be the two of us, and we got a lot to talk about, so let's just jump right into it. Mike Vrabel, the new head coach of the New England Patriots. I think we all kind of saw this coming over the last about 7 or 8 days since Mayo was fired. We knew he was the front runner, and it was just kind of a matter of time. What are your thoughts on the hire? I know you questioned the search process a little bit, but what's your thoughts overall on Mike Vrabel coming to New England?
Super excited. It's about a year too late, but certainly, a blessing in disguise. I really thought the last offseason's hiring process left a lot to be desired. I thought we were all willing to give Mayo a shot. We certainly did. Gave him credit when he was good, slammed him when he was bad. But we certainly lucked out. Vrabel was not hired following being let go by the Tennessee Titans a little over a year ago, which was really beneficial to us. Obviously, in hindsight, here we are a year later, and Mike Vrabel is wearing Patriots attire to a press conference at Gillette Stadium. So, super excited. I go back and forth about the process. Obviously, they wanted Vrabel from the very beginning, as noted by the fact that they interviewed Pep Hamilton and Byron Leftwich Monday, right? Last Monday, a week ago, that they interviewed them.
Tuesday, but yeah.
Tuesday?
Yeah.
Okay. But, two guys who are not in the NFL, which just screamed, they were doing it to honor the Rooney Rule, and that it was really down to Vrabel and Ben Johnson. Given the circumstances, Ben Johnson was kind of on the outside looking in because he can only do it virtually. So they kind of had to jump on it. I would have liked a little bit more of a robust process. But given the circumstances, not super realistic, given that Vrabel, was certainly highly pursued. He said that in his press conference today. That a lot of other teams were interested and had him as a preferred choice. We can get into the feelings of it all, and obviously he had felt that this was his number one choice all along. He said he felt in his soul that this is where he wanted to be. So I'm certainly excited. For the next step in the process. Again, the football gods were looking down on us because if Mike Vrabel had taken a job a year ago, we wouldn't be in this situation. We'd be interviewing God knows who, and maybe secretly hoping that the Lions lose in the first round or second round so that we can get Ben Johnson in for a personal interview. But, certainly excited. I think they made the right choice. I know they couldn't have, but I think he should have been the choice a year ago. But, here we are, and, we can start speculating on how he's going to fill out the staff. But, certainly excited for the future of the organization.
Yeah, thinking about, when you said that he kind of couldn't have, supposedly Mayo had a $10 million buyout if they didn't hire him.
Correct. Which
I don't know how much Mayo is making per year or was on this new deal, but it probably would have been cheaper for him to just pay Mayo the buyout and hire Vrabel than having to pay him what I would imagine to be at least another 2 years of salary. Because I would expect he signed a 3-year extension at minimum.
Yeah, I don't know. Usually, I don't know what the deal was for. But yeah.
Yeah.
But I also Kraft also. This is kind of twofold, right? Kraft didn't envision hiring him in 2024. He was picturing him being the heir apparent to start this offseason. But the struggles and whatever issues the Patriots organization had between Kraft and Bill manifested, and kind of forced their hand where they didn't want to wait another year. Bill was clearly done. You could see it on the sideline at the end of the year. So I think interesting way to get here. But yeah, who really knows how much they had to pay Mayo, to terminate his deal, but Kraft didn't envision firing him, after one single season either.
No. Well, no, most certainly. I mean, he obviously handpicked Mayo years in advance. He didn't expect Mike Vrabel to be available. He had a pretty good reputation in Tennessee. He was viewed as a good coach, and it was kind of a surprise that he got let go. So, when Kraft made that promise to Mayo, Vrabel wasn't available. Um, like I said, he could have maybe gone back on it and hired Vrabel, but he didn't, and here we are. Gerard Mayo had his chance. I don't think anybody looks at the record and says that's why Gerard Mayo was fired, because
No,
we all
I,
kind of
I
expected
agree.
like anywhere between 2 and 5 wins, 2 and maybe 6 wins if they pulled out an extra upset. So it's not really about the record. It was simply about the control. It was about his comments in the media. It was the lack of preparedness for the team. And just overall, he came in and didn't really he wasn't good enough. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. He just wasn't good enough. So
Right.
props on Kraft because he had the ability and the option to say no. I'm gonna stick with him and I'm gonna give him one more year. But he admitted his mistake. He blamed himself, and then he went out and said, you know, Mike Vrabel's available, and I'm sure in the final month of the season he kind of test the waters there, talked to him through some back channels, I'm sure, and
Yeah,
said,
this wouldn't have happened this quickly if they waited until the after Mayo was fired to
yeah,
have
and
any kind of conversation. We can speculate, but it's pretty. I know we had talked, privately about how it's technically illegal to have those conversations, but it's like we can speculate, and it's pretty strongly believed that they happen, but you can't prove it one way or the other. But I agree.
yeah,
I don't think this happens this quickly if the initial conversations with Mayo happen after. I'm sorry, with Vrabel happen after the Mayo firing.
no, absolutely, and obviously I think they had a good idea that Vrabel would be highly interested. And so when they decided, all right, we're firing Mayo, obviously these two, Pep Hamilton and Leftwich, I mean, let's call it for what it was. They're bullshit interviews to satisfy the Rooney Rule.
Call a spade a
Um,
spade.
yeah, everyone knows that. I talked last week on our last episode of my distaste for the Rooney Rule as a whole. I think it's really dumb, and I think it causes more issues than anything else. The best person should be hired for the job, and that's simple. But I think he went into this scenario and he said, whether you agree with it or not, Mike Vrabel is my top candidate, and the only person that I feel interested enough that could pull me off of that is Ben Johnson. So we could talk about the need to interview, do a full search and stuff like that. I could say I would have preferred, I guess, a full search. Like, sure, go interview a bunch of people and just to get a good idea of really exactly what you're looking for, and bounce ideas off of people and stuff like that. But in the end, they clearly had a top two, and it was Mike Vrabel's job to lose, and Ben Johnson had to probably do something like it could convince them in a way that was over the top for them to considering not hiring Mike Vrabel. Um, I know both of us went back and forth on this decision and who we wanted and stuff like that, and we both kind of, we're saying, I like the idea of teaming up Ben Johnson with Drake May, but I also am more confident that Vrabel will be at least a good coach.
Yes.
And that's kind of what it came down to, I think, for both of us. And so, we were happy either way. If it was Ben Johnson, I was going to be more than happy with taking that chance because he has been that impressive as a OC in Detroit. And I'm happy with it, Mike Vrabel, because I do think Mike Vrabel is a great coach. I do think he's going to bring in, I know, New England fans hate this word, but culture to New England now. And Vrabel brings Vrabel, he's just another Belichick tag lately. That's what people have been kind of throwing out there. And my answer to that is you're clearly like saying that in the sense of like he's tough, hard nosed, wants to win in the trenches, stuff like that. Sure. I mean, I guess, but I mean, that's a lot of coaches, like a lot of coaches like that type of personality. Uh, but the only other reason people are really comparing him is because obviously he has a connection to New England. Other than that, I mean, they're very different people. I mean, Vrabel is significantly more vocal. He's significantly louder. He's significantly more intense. Belichick would just like look at you and you probably shit your pants because
Yeah.
it's Bill Belichick. But
Yeah, he had that.
Vrabel,
He had that look. Vrabel's going to get up in your
yeah,
face.
it exactly. And Belichick had that reputation, from 2 decades worth of success where like he doesn't need to yell just what he says. People better listen or you get the hell out. Vrabel's obviously a lot more animated. He's a lot more passionate. He's a lot more vocal, and I think he's going to bring a level of culture and a level of intensity. I love what he said today. He said we're going to be bringing in what was it? Take entitlement out of New
Yes.
England or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
he said it's funny. I was kind of like live texting a group chat I have with like four of my best friends, well, three of my best friends from high school. And I was just like live. I was like, hey, I was like, I'm gonna watch the interview. I was like, I'll fill you guys in on notable things. And the part about that is I wrote that he said that the Patriots players will be grateful and respect the opportunity to play for them. He will not accept entitlement and that everything will be earned.
yeah, and the good thing is, we saw that. I think the better comparison for Mike Vrabel and people won't really like it's what we hoped Gerard Mayo could have brought.
Yes.
And we're in the reason it's hope, like we know Vrabel can do that because he already did it once. So it's not like a hope. We know what he can bring to the table. It's
Yeah.
what we thought Gerard Mayo could bring, where it was the detail oriented. He learned from Bill to be on top of everything, to be prepared, but connect better with this younger generation and be a little bit more of a player's coach and stuff like that. Obviously, I think the players liked him for the most part, but he wasn't good enough in being detailed and having the team prepared and all that, and that's why he was let go.
Yeah, and I
We
think
know
that
what
had a I was gonna say I think that had a lot to do with like if you can't really compare the resumes, but compare Vrabel's coaching resume to Mayo's. Now Mayo's been out of the league for less years and he's been a coach for less years. So obviously this is more with a grain of salt, but Vrabel's been through multiple organizations. So he was originally hired as a linebackers coach for Ohio State, and he actually admitted in the interview today that he's like the first interview with Urban Meyer was arguably the worst coaching interview probably in the history of time. And then he got promoted to he wasn't D coordinator, but he was linebackers and something else when he was at Ohio State for his second year or second and third year before he moved on to the NFL. So he was at multiple levels doing multiple things. He wasn't just a positional coach. And then of course he goes on to be a head coach. And I feel like to talk about what we thought Gerard Mayo could be is if Gerard Mayo followed a similar path as opposed to them being like, hey, them meaning the Patriots, Kraft specifically, being like, hey, like we really believe in Gerard Mayo, he can be the next guy, and just thrusting him into the head coaching role. If he had gone through not necessarily the same path, but a similar path where, he was running a defense and he was responsible for more things than just the inside linebackers and, half of a de facto GM, defensive coordinator, because Steve was the one calling the plays. I feel like that was the part when Kraft admitted that he didn't set him up for success. Like that's the part that's what stood out to me.
Correct.
But yeah, so I think Mayo having that past experience and failing as a head coach certainly makes him a better fit this time around. And it's interesting like how the universe unfolds. But in hindsight, we're probably where we should be right now. Should Vrabel be going into his second season as the head coach? I mean, probably. if you could ask Kraft if he could do it all over again, he probably would not have promised the job to Mayo. Mayo may have been part of the conversation, but maybe it's Bill Belichick out, Mike, and then Mayo becomes the full-time legitimate D coordinator, calling plays, scheming a defense, and then who knows from there. But I think
Yeah.
how things played out, and like you said, I think culture matters. I think the way that it played out, we're in the spot we want to be at this point.
Yeah, well, you also have to think of it in the sense that, like, in terms of building back up, uh, if they hired Vrabel last offseason, it's entirely possible this team, and I would say likely that this team wins at least 5 games. And if you win five,
Yeah, probably. I'd have to go back and look at the schedule to see like what the one score or almost one score games
yeah,
turned out to be. But I would agree with you.
yeah, they're probably at 5 or 6 wins, something like that, and they're looking at, I don't know, that would probably be outside the top 8. Definitely outside the top 8 if they're at 5 or 6, because I know the Raiders are at what, 6, and
the Raiders are at the 6th pick, and they have. So let's see. So if they had gone 5-12, assuming that assuming the strength of schedule is the same, because I don't know how the strength of schedule really would have changed.
the Pats were pretty low. So
Yeah,
they
but
would have probably had the tiebreaker to get a higher pick than most teams.
yeah, but if they beat other teams, but if they beat other teams, that number probably goes down. So if they're sitting at 5-12, they have the 7th pick, not the 4th pick, because the Jets currently picked 7th at
All
5 and
right.
12
So
with a
yeah.
495 strength of schedule.
So it's obviously not a big difference, but the brighter picture is, all right, we suffered through that this year, and it was ugly, definitely ugly. But now we're in a little bit better spot where we got Vrabel and we got a higher pick than what we probably would have had if Mike Vrabel was here. Now, you obviously would have preferred Vrabel here because then you would feel like the rebuild is a year further in than what we are. But it looks like we got our quarterback. It looks like we have a coach that will set a standard in a good floor for this team.
Yes.
Now, obviously, the question is, where are they going to build out on this team? And that starts with the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator on this staff. I know we haven't done a ton of diving deep into the DC's side of it. I know this Shane Bowen, I believe his name is. He's a DC in New York. The Giants, he used to be Vrabel's DC. He's supposedly, or I heard, like, I saw one thing that they're going to interview him. I don't know if that's true or not, if it was accurate. But there's plenty of options, obviously, across the league for DC. It'll be interesting to see who he brings in. I think we both kind of like, we're not really worried about the DC. It comes down to the OC for them. And, who are you feeling on the offensive side of the ball that, maybe he's not your concrete pick or preference, but that you're interested in hiring?
So I had mentioned on social, and we've talked about this privately, that like the guy that I like, and you accurately pointed out that it's an unrealistic expectation, is Liam Cohen, who's the Bucs offensive coordinator. But I had forgotten, shame on me, that in order for him to make a lateral move, he has to get approval from Tampa to do it. And Tampa's not going to do that. I don't think anyway. Now, whether or not they would, I mean, maybe they will. I don't know. We don't have to dive down the rabbit hole, but it's very possible you could see some staff changes coming in Tampa after their loss last night. So who knows what the future holds? But I mean, in an ideal scenario, if they let him out of his, if they give him the option, great, just because he's a local guy and I think he'd be interested in being here and he's young, and he's helped revive Baker Mayfield's career. So I think as far as realistic options, Nick Caley's a name that's been tossed around for a couple of years. He was a possible guy that may or may not have been the offensive coordinator under Gerard Mayo last year.
They supposedly offered him the job, and he said that he wanted to.
I was going to ask if I forget who they interviewed. Alex and Pelt was like their 12th or 13th interview.
Yeah, so from what I remember, they offered the job to Zach Robinson. He chose to go to Atlanta with Raheem Morris.
Yep.
And then they offered the job to Nick Caley, and I believe the report was that they offered him a pretty significant salary. But he decided that he thought it was best, and his family had kind of really enjoyed Southern California, that he wanted to do another year in LA. Now, obviously, that could change tremendously now because I think that he probably has more confidence in Vrabel, and then more importantly, there's Drake May into the mix, so that's a lot more attractive for him this time around. So, could he be interested? I would imagine he's more interested, at least this year, than last year.
Yes. The other guy, and I'll give you credit for this because I really started to like the wheel started to turn because like with any coordinator interviewing cycle, you've got guys who are not offensive coordinators who are under other people, who you're hoping can make that next jump, which is why we talk about a guy like Nick Caley, who's the pass game coordinator and tight ends coach under, I don't even know who the new offensive coordinator is in.
Is it the Kubiaks? I think it's no, it's LaFleur's brother, I believe.
Let's see, Rams
I
offensive
think it's
coordinator.
I think it's Matt LaFleur or Mike LaFleur.
Yeah, Mike LaFleur, who's been he's going into he was the OC starting in 2023.
Yeah.
So in any case, the other guy that interested me, and you brought him up today, and like immediately I was kind of like, meh, but then I thought about it, and it's certainly an intriguing option is T. Martin, quarterbacks coach in Baltimore. The more I thought about it, the more I was intrigued by it. You brought up some valid points. I mean, I'm sure he's on your list, so I won't dive.
I do that often.
I won't dive too deep down the rabbit hole because I'm sure you've got some things queued up. But just given what he's done in Baltimore, and he's been an offensive coordinator in college. He's kind of like a little bit of a Mike Vrabel, where he's been in the pros and in the college ranks. He might be most famously known as a member of the Brady Six. For anybody who doesn't know, one of the 6 quarterbacks drafted ahead of Tom Brady in the 2000 NFL draft. But certainly an interesting candidate. There's other guys. I'm going to blank on his name. He followed Kevin O'Connell to Minnesota, the pass game coordinator for the Vikings.
No, there's the OC Wes Phillips and the QB coach Josh McCown.
Well, we can't. Well, I mean, Wes Phillips isn't going to. I mean, unless Minnesota lets him out of his contract,
He might. I mean, because he's not calling plays, and
yeah, O'Connell calls the plays in Minnesota.
If you think about it, that offense people should be trying to pick from that coaching tree right now, and no one on the offensive side of the ball. Oh no, Josh McCown has one I think head coach interview, but Wes Phillips got nothing. So I think if you're looking at it on his point of view, he's going to say, I would need to get into a situation where I can show I can be a good play caller to increase the chances.
Yeah. Who are you? Oh, McCown. That's right. McCown's the quarterback's coach. And then Brian Angelico, I don't know how to say his last name, is the pass game coordinator in Minnesota. So he would be he's the Nick Caley equivalent in Minnesota. I don't know who. I can look it up. I'm not sure who that person is for the Ravens. You brought up a good point, and I can let you go into it. Is with T. Martin there. I mean, Lamar Jackson has gotten noticeably better as a passer. So let's see. So T. Martin is the quarterback's coach. They do not have a pass game coordinator.
No.
They have a run game coordinator, but not a pass game coordinator. So it really falls to Todd Monken and T. Martin, really.
Yeah, and for T, he, like you mentioned, he has experience at the coaching level. He was in Kentucky, then he went to Tennessee. I want to say he was in USC, maybe.
I also misspoke. They do have a pass game coordinator. It's Chris Hewitt. He's also the assistant head coach, so he doesn't fall under a positional coach.
Yeah. So, he has experience in the college game. He was the OC in college. He has experience coaching wide receivers, and then he was a QB for a few years in the NFL, and obviously is now the QB coach in Baltimore. I think a lot of the credit goes to Monken in pulling Lamar into that where he is right now, which is arguably his best season ever. And more impressively, as a passer, he has improved over the last couple of years. I always felt like he was a below average passer, and if it wasn't for his legs, he would be in big trouble. He is now shown to be, I think, an above average passer.
Yes.
And that he can handle himself without running the ball. Now, who gets most of the credit for that? Obviously, Lamar gets a big chunk. Monken gets a big chunk, but then you also turn into, say, T. Martin. He obviously has experience working with as an OC and then working with Lamar now for the last 2 years. I think it would be important to bring him in and just see where, he felt like he improved Lamar's game on his end. What did you do to get him into that, to where he is now? I really like him. Like you said, Nick Healy is a good option. I think Wes Phillips is worthy of taking a look. Josh McCown's worthy of taking a look. There's obviously McDaniels, which I know you're out on, but it's certainly an option. Tommy Reese, who's in Cleveland, he might get the Cleveland OC job. I don't know if he's going to want that job, speaking that this will be the third OC in the last 3 years, and it doesn't call plays. But Vrabel was just in Cleveland, so he obviously spent some time with Reese. So Reese was the OC in Notre Dame and Alabama before going to Cleveland this year. So he's definitely an option. And beyond that, it's probably Jason Vrabel, which would just be hilarious to have both of them on the same staff.
I love how I love how you casually trolled me because you knew exactly what you were doing. And then I feel like you kind of played dumb, like, oh, I'm not spelling his name. I'm not spelling his name wrong. It's another guy.
No, I did it. I did it obviously on X multiple times. I got like people, but someone was like, "Of course, it's nepotism like usual." Robert Kraft. I was like, "Buddy, they're not related."
No,
I'm just fucking with you.
Yeah.
No. But he's a pass game coordinator in Green Bay. He's a younger guy, so I would like to talk to him. After that, I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting a few names. The OC in Oregon, I would be interested in talking to. Oregon's offense has been mighty impressive the last couple of years, especially considering they lost Bo Nix and they were still pretty damn good this year.
I mean, to be fair, granted, I think their wide receivers took a step back, but Dylan Gabriel's not really a slouch. Your offensive coordinator in Oregon is Will Stein. And college is more traditional. There's no like pass or run game coordinator type stuff. They'll do like, you can see coordinators that be also positional coaches. Like their defensive coordinator is also the linebackers coach. But yeah, Will Stein. And then I wanted to go back to T. Martin real quick. So T. Martin's, in terms of his like historical coaching, like what in the college ranks, what could he probably hang his hat on the most? Is that he was the pass game coordinator for 2 years at USC from 2014 to 2015. He was also the wide receivers coach. He started as the wide receivers coach in 2012. He had that title through 2018. 2014 and 15 was pass game coordinator, and then 16, 17, 18 was offensive coordinator when Sam Darnold was quarterback at USC. He had Sam Darnold for his entire career, and then he was the pass game coordinator for Cody Kessler for 2 years prior to Sam Darnold taking the job. So, I mean, USC's, certainly a blue blood program, but, he helped Sam Darnold become, the third overall pick in the 2018 or 2019 draft. Obviously, the Jets ruined him like they ruin every other quarterback that walks through the front door, but certainly he's revived his career in Minnesota. So obviously there was some talent there, and so obviously T. Martin has really shown that he can do it. Like with any coach, right? Like great coaches can maximize a mediocre roster and be serviceable, but at the very least, a good coach does need talent, and he's shown that he can improve guys who are already good. as you mentioned with Lamar
Yeah.
taking steps forward as a passer, because he was known as a dual threat, but passing was certainly a weak point. I don't think he completed a high percentage of his throws early in his career, and now
Yeah.
he's really turned that around.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly an option for me. I would definitely want to bring him in. Like I said, there's a variety of other names. The few that I did forget was Clint Kubiak, who was in New Orleans this year. He kind of got some good reviews while he was there. Obviously, he didn't have a ton to work with, especially when Carr went down. They're going to have a new coach, so he seemingly might be available. Uh,
Is
on
he
top of that,
he was the offensive coordinator, right?
yeah, yeah. On top of that, there's Brian Hartline, who was the co-offensive coordinator and wide receiver coach at Ohio State the last few years. Obviously, obviously talent is talent to an extent, but Ohio State has been pushing out wide receivers like it's their job over the last handful of years.
Wide receiver,
Um,
you.
yeah, and on top of that, he's been the co-offensive coordinator with, I think it's Chip Kelly, who's there now. He's obviously an interesting former player, so he would be a good guy to look at. And then I think the last one would be Tanner Engstrand. He's the pass game coordinator in Detroit. Now, if Ben Johnson takes the job, I would assume he is the front runner to get promoted as OC. If that is the path, I would find it very difficult that he would not take that path because, well, look at the talent that is in Detroit right now.
Yes.
But I do think there's a chance that Ben Johnson returns to Detroit, and if that's the case, then Engstrand or whatever how you say his last name is certainly a viable option for
Yeah.
um,
And
for
here's
OC.
if you want to, and if you're going to dive into the college ranks, um, a dark horse would be Tom Allen, who is the current defensive coordinator for the Penn State Nittany Lions, who had one of, if not the best defenses in all of college football this past season. Tough luck loss in the semifinal, and obviously they have some talent. Obviously, he was blessed to have Abdul Carter, who, if Matt has his way, will be wearing Patriot blue in 3 months and 2 weeks. But yeah, so kind of if you're gonna dip into the college ranks, he might be a dark horse candidate to try to make a jump up to the pros.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there were other names. Brian Fleury, he's the QB coach in San Francisco. He got a head coaching interview with the Jets. He's an option. Marcus Brady. Oh my God, I'm having a mind blank of where he's from. I forget where he's from off the top of my head. Frank Smith's the OC in Miami. I guess he could be an option. And then, like really after that, I think that's probably where you look. You don't look too much far out of that. There was a couple more in college that I'm trying to think of that you could bring in. There's also, a couple of my other friends were trashing me for this, was Phil Longo, who was the OC under Drake May at UNC when he had his great first year.
His
He doesn't
2022
exactly.
his 2022
Yeah.
season. Yeah.
Yeah. So he went to Wisconsin to be the OC, and then now he's the head coach at Sam Houston, I think. So he's not actually really a viable option, probably, but it was just an interesting option to at least look into a little bit.
Yeah. And as I
But I
googled
mean,
him, Tom Allen took the Clemson DC job, so he's not coming to the pros.
yeah, I mean, O'Brien took the Ohio State OC job and then left. It's
Yeah.
possible.
Nah.
No, I mean it's unlikely, but it's possible. But I mean, in terms of the offense coordinator, I want Vrabel to look, cast a wide net, get a good idea of what he wants in an offense, and then, I just don't. The one thing I don't really want in this scenario is him to just hire the people he knows. I want him to cast a bigger net and at least interview these guys and get a good sense of what they could bring to the table. So they can maximize Drake May's, um, offensive abilities. I definitely, it's tough because if you hire someone like Josh McCown and he comes in and balls out, he's going to get a head coaching job real quick. Um, but on the other end, if you hire someone like Josh McDaniels, he's going to be around for the foreseeable future. So it's a tough little bit of a balance of how you want to look at it. I think in the end, you have to hire the best option, who you think is the best, and not worry about them leaving in a year or two. So, I mean, at the top of my list, I'm looking at Minnesota. I'm looking at LA with Nick Haley. I'm looking at T. Martin in Baltimore. I'm looking at Jason Vrabel in Green Bay. And I'm saying, what can you bring to the table? And so I still struggle to see who I want as my top option, but they have a good amount of options, and it's just a matter of seeing, how it plays out and who they prefer.
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating process. Um, what's interesting is that I feel like the crop of candidates for um, 2024, yeah, so like a year ago, I feel like the crop of candidates, I don't know why, it felt deeper. Like you had like multiple people from the LA Rams were up for offensive coordinator jobs. Um, you had, I feel like there were other names that were at the top of the list. I mean, the Patriots went through 12 interviews or 13 interviews before they finally landed on their guy. So there are obviously plenty of guys. And obviously, you don't really make a name for yourself until you've made a name for yourself. Um, I just this year's crop of candidates feet like there's so many question marks. Like I don't know what to expect. So to your point, I think it's cast a wide net, find the best candidate. Given what you can expect out of Mike Vrabel as a head coach, I think the important thing is to find a guy who can get creative with Drake May, who can maximize his skill set. I think it's why somebody like a T Martin or a Jason Vrabel are interesting because they're used to working with quarterbacks who, and granted, Lamar Jackson is arguably the biggest dual threat, the most dangerous dual threat quarterback in the NFL. But you look at a guy like Jordan Love in Green Bay, kind of like a Drake May, maybe not quite as mobile, but like he can threaten you with the legs if he needs to. So, maybe you find a guy who's familiar with the skill set that you have with your quarterback now. But it'll certainly be interesting, to what they do next. And to be honest, I couldn't even begin to tell you who to look at on the defensive side of the ball. I'm not, like you said, I'm not as worried about it because that's kind of where Vrabel's head lies. Um, and so because he's got the experience on the defensive side of the ball, somebody that he's comfortable with is more than sufficient for me. Um, but yeah, getting that creative offensive mind that can, have fun and kind of unleash Drake May and hopefully some other weapons via the draft and free agency is kind of where I'm at. Cheddar making a guest appearance. You're muted, by the way, or you came unplugged.
There we go.
There you go.
And he made the comment today. He wants to be aggressive, but not
Reckless.
erratic. I think reckless. And so obviously, people are going to interpret that a little bit differently. There was a lot of comments recently that look at what he did in Tennessee. They were this run heavy team. They didn't pass the ball enough. And my response to that is pretty simple. First of all, when you have the greatest running back of this generation, what are you going to do? You're going to use him as much as possible, right?
You're clearly going to throw it 50 times a night.
Yeah, like this is common sense. On top of that, Ryan Tannehill had the best year of his career under Mike Vrabel. Even when he wasn't passing a ton, it was the best year of his career, numbers wise, touchdown wise, interception wise. It was the best year of his career, very clear cut. Now, you look into the sense of, all right, well, what is he going to build in New England? And the answer is just very simple. And this is where just people are looking to bitch about bitch to bitch. And it's that Mike Vrabel will go with what is the strength of the team. If the strength is the passing game, he will go with the passing game. He
Right.
knows what he has in Drake May. And so he's not going to just like, all right, we got the young, good quarterback that can, throw it, throw it well and air it out and, be this big playmaker, whether it's, like the Josh Allen, like, and all that type of stuff. But no, we're going to run the ball 40 times a game. Like, can we have a little bit of common sense here? Just a little bit of common sense.
Yep.
He's going to go with what is the best for the team. If the best is riding the back of Drake May, they're going to ride the back of Drake May. It's that simple. So this whole notion that like he's just going to be this run heavy 40 times a game, run the ball no matter what, like it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. He'll play to the strengths of the offense, and and that's probably going to evolve. They have the number 4 pick for a reason. They're not very good. Right now, Drake May is the strength. He said in his interview today that they asked him, how like what kind of players he was looking for and how he wanted to round out the offense, in the offseason. And he didn't really open up too much other than, he acknowledged that the offensive line is an issue and that he wants to get stronger at the offensive line position. But there's plenty of places where this team needs talent. They need it on, probably across the board on the defensive line. You definitely need help, on the offensive line, the wide receiver position. And then beyond that, you kind of get into the fun part. Mondre had some fumble issues, but wasn't horrendous this year. Could they upgrade the running back position? Maybe, but then you can start to have fun with it and decide, what's the best available. How am I going to attack this roster through the draft? Obviously free agency is 2 months away, so that's the first opportunity we're going to have to see, what they want to do, what kind of pushes they want to make. T. Higgins is kind of the big prize. My gut tells me, just based on what he said, things around the league. Wouldn't surprise me if Kansas City spent some money on him. If the Bengals offer him a discounted rate, but it's at least somewhere within striking distance of a market value offer, he might stay in Cincinnati. He said that today. He said that 2-3 weeks ago, that he thinks Joe Burrow's the best quarterback on the planet and wants to play with nobody else. But I expect him to be aggressive, and go get, a T. Higgins or somebody else. Chris Godwin's a free agent. Once you figure out wide receiver, offensive line, defensive line, it'll be interesting to see how he fills out the roster and has fun with it.
Yeah, and obviously, the O-line and wide receiver are two of the biggest needs right now. We've obviously gone into length about the options of what they could go. I do think they're going to throw the house at T. Higgins. I think that they're going to make him an offer that's probably similar to what they offered Brandon Ayuk, which could another team do that as well? Very possibly. But I don't know if I see it. I think that I think Elliott Wolf has shown so far, and until it happens, it doesn't really matter, but has shown so far that what matters the most is paying the money, and they look to be willing to do that. So we'll see if they put the money where the mouth is type of situation, and until it happens, it doesn't matter. Talk is cheap, but all signs point to them making a big time offer to T. Higgins, and if he makes it to free agency, I'm pretty damn confident that he ends up for the average free agent. I'm pretty damn confident that he ends up in New England. Obviously, the odds wouldn't be terribly high, but for the average free agent, I'm confident.
Yeah, I would agree.
And then beyond that, obviously we talked about the O-line. We'll see. It's a big question mark of what tackles actually make it to free agency. Ronnie Stanley in Baltimore is potentially available. Moore in Pittsburgh is potentially available. Alaric Jackson, who is my preference from LA, is potentially available. I would like to see them add a veteran tackle so that when they go into the draft, depending on who that veteran tackle is, they could say we don't need to really focus on left tackle early in the draft, or we could say we don't have to. Obviously, if you sign someone like, let's say, Moore from Pittsburgh, is he great? No. Is he serviceable? Certainly. I think he's an average left tackle. So if you sign someone like him to a multi-year deal, he's also incredibly durable so far in his career. You can say, we don't have to go left tackle in round one. If you
Correct.
sign someone like Alaric Jackson or maybe a Ronnie Stanley to a 3-4 year deal, you could say, okay, we definitely don't need to go left tackle in round one. My dog is
What is he?
proceeding. He
What
is
is?
scratching. He's trying to dig into the couch.
Oh,
Good old Cheddar.
he hid some cheese in there.
And yeah, so I mean, Alaric Jackson is my top option at tackle. There's a few more. Obviously, they could also go to the guard spot and sign someone like Trey Smith, who we need more of a need than at tackle than guard. But if you can add an elite guard to the mix, it certainly helps the O line as a whole too. But Vrabel made a comment today that he wants to build from within the trenches, and that's how you do. You got to go from the line of scrimmage out, and they're desperately in need of fixing both lines of scrimmage, whether that's on the offense or defensive side of the ball. We obviously talked about what they could do at number 4. Currently, as it stands, I think if you sit at number 4, you're looking at Abdul Qadir. And I really don't think it should be a question about, like, if there's another option. Assuming Hunter goes 3 to Jackson to
The Giants.
the Giants, which is a big. I don't even think we should really assume that. But
No, but
if he goes,
there's talk that given this was, I think, before Deshaun Watson re-injured his Achilles, there was talk of whether or not Cleveland was even going to draft a quarterback in the first round.
yeah, and I saw a report that, like, there was supposedly that Cleveland might look into trading for Kirk Cousins, which would just be laugh out loud funny and such a stupid idea. But that's obviously an option as well. But it's tough to, like, talk about it now and like to set things up because so much can change between now and the draft. But for what it is now, I think Abdul Qadir is the easy decision at 4. The Patriots have no pass rush at all. Like they were like 28th or something in the league in sacks. They desperately need someone to go after the quarterback. And when you do that, it helps everybody. You have a guy that can cause, you don't have to get, a 20 sack a game, 20 sacks a year guy. If this guy's just a constant menace to the quarterback and the offensive line, it creates numerous issues. And it speeds up the quarterback, makes him make more mistakes, and that allows more opportunity for the secondary, which, I think the secondary as a whole was, Gonzo was great, but as a whole, they were okay this year. All things considered, if you have a trash D-line, it makes the job even more difficult. So I think Abdul Qadir is the answer there at the defensive line, and you could say it's a little bit more likely now that they even hired a defensive coach. But Vrabel made it very clear.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Vrabel made it very clear that the offensive side of the ball in the O-line in protecting Drake May is going to be of great importance. So, obviously they could – I don't want to tackle at 4 unless I start to really, really fall in love with one of the options. But if they get an offer to trade back, then that's certainly an option too. We played around with, like, Carolina maybe trading up for one of the defensive guys. Chicago could. And if they tossed a couple seconds or something like that with it, then certainly that puts us in the range of, okay, now we can consider a Will Campbell. We can consider a
Kelvin Banks.
Yeah,
Simmons, Milam.
Simmons. Yeah, exactly. And again, free agency will obviously affect how all this plays out. But as it stands right now, if you're sitting at 4, I think you go Qadir. If you move back from 4, I think you then look into probably the tackle position. You can never have too many.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I was gonna say I think it matters too. what they do in free agency as far as addressing those two options, right? So,
Yeah.
let's just say I mean, I don't know who's available as far as edge rushers. I mean, Khalil Mack is arguably the best option, but he's going to be 34 and he's possibly retiring. I mean,
Yeah, I don't
you
want.
don't have a ton of like outside linebacker D end type options in free agency. Um, you could to me, I think like just based on his age and the potential ceiling, like Chase Young to me is your best defensive end as far as what the Patriots could possibly go after in free agency. But let's just
Yeah,
say if
so I don't want them to go get like a 31-year-old guy. Like we're
no,
in a rebuild. So Chase Young's a decent option. The other option that I like is Malcolm Kuntz, I believe his name is, from Las Vegas. He missed the entire year because he tore his ACL in the preseason, but he had 8 sacks in 2023. He's still pretty young, and because of the injury, I think you could get him for pretty cheap. So he's a
yeah,
guy I do like. Obviously, there's defensively, there's Zach Bond, who I can't imagine Philly is going to let him get to the market with the year he had. They'll tag him, I think, at the very least. But if he happened to get to the market, he's a guy that I think that you can throw the bag at and get him into the mixture because the Patriots linebacker core as a whole fell off this year.
yeah. Well, they lost their anchor
Granted,
in the center, and when you don't have your top run stopper and you don't get after the quarterback, that's an issue. Where I was going with that was if they get a legitimate edge rusher, and a tackle or an edge rusher and an offensive lineman in free agency, that's where I would see a trade back. I think
also, there's also Tim brings it up. I forgot about that. Josh Sweat is expected to hit the market too. So in a
Phil,
Hassan Reddick,
I don't, given the drama, I don't really have a ton of interest in
yeah,
Hassan Reddick.
but Sweat's
Maybe
a good option.
Philly,
Yes,
because
yeah.
because Montez Sweat is in Washington or
No, it's
was last I knew.
it's Josh Sweat, I believe. He's like an
Yeah,
8 to 12 sack type of guy, 10 to 12 sack type of guy. He's pretty good. He's certainly another option, obviously depending on the price. But um, the one thing I looked at, and I think it's almost a certainty, is if you look at Gerard Mayo's past, what one thing that in Zolak and Bertram,
Mayo or Vrabel.
Vrabel, excuse me.
It's going
If
to
you
take
look
us a
at
while
Vrabel,
to.
yeah, if you look at Vrabel's past, the one thing in the players that he used to coach, Bertrand and Zolak brought it up today, is he's going to want to come in and set a culture. And the way you do that is to bring in some vets that can help set that culture and lead the team.
Josh Simmons.
Um,
Sorry to say that out loud.
Obviously, yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. He posted after that he liked it by accident, I guess. But I went and looked into the players that are available in free agency that have a connection to Vrabel. And without diving terribly deep into every guy, I kind of like knocked out the guys that suck now. Like there's a few linebackers that like David Long or something like that he was pretty good. I wanted him a couple of years ago, but he sucks now. Like he's doing dog shit, I think, down in Miami. But there's an Elijah Molden who is a cornerback turned safety that was drafted by Tennessee in LA. I think he's a very probable target for them. Christian Fulton, he's a cornerback. David Bush and Jack Gibbons are linebackers. Tier Tart, Naquan Jones are both D line, and then you could go the offensive line side of the ball and go Dylan Radunes and Jedrick Willis, who was in Cleveland this year. Obviously, I'm not betting on everyone, but I would be pretty damn confident to say that at least one of these guys end up in a Patriot uniform because, like I said, Kraft's gonna. Oh my God, I'm off. Vrabel's gonna want to set the tone in a culture, and the way to do that is to bring in a series of vets that you can trust. Obviously, there's also Austin Hooper, who was in Tennessee with Vrabel, so him returning is certainly even more of a possibility now as well.
Yeah, and that's also just a quick aside. I think tight end is a sneaky need for them. Hunter Henry is what, 32? ish. He's in that
Something like
ballpark
that.
anyway.
30, 31,
Uh,
32.
so I mean, so he's not getting any younger. So maybe like like mid round options. I mean, we don't have to dive down that rabbit hole. Um, but I think given the cap space, given the fact that the Patriots, it's weird, right? Like Gerard Mayo was the guy that Kraft wanted, but Vrabel's a guy who like gets everybody excited for different reasons. Given we've talked about it, his history, what he's done. Um, with the cap space, like that's kind of like I'm actually excited going into the offseason. Last year I kind of felt a little, I guess uneasy is the word. I really didn't know what they were going to do. I knew, we knew they were going to need a quarterback in the draft. We were, really hoping that it would be, I know we both kind of settled on Drake May as our QB1, knowing that Caleb Williams was not going to be available. But I mean, at least for me, I was a little uneasy. I didn't really know what to expect out of them in the offseason in terms of spending money, even though they had plenty to spend. Um, and they really only spent money on their own guys. They didn't really go out and extend themselves for non-Patriots free agents, right? Like, granted, the guys that they retained, Onwenu, Duggar, I mean, Uche was on a short-term deal before we traded him. Those are talented players, right? And so I hope, I have the confidence that, Mike Vrabel's going to, light the fire under these guys and get the most out of them. But I'm excited for what they can do in the offseason. There's certainly so many angles they can go. Um, we've really only looked at, well, what big fish are out there that hopefully they can go get. We've talked about Alaric Jackson, T. Higgins, but we really haven't looked into those like second tier guys that Vrabel's got connections to, or maybe they're being cast off because, they were high profile guys. Like Chase Young was the number 2 overall pick 3 or 4 years ago. Like he was the premier pass rusher in college not that long ago, and he didn't really wasn't really able to replicate it. Zach Bond, to your point, didn't do anything really for the Saints before they cast him off, and obviously he stepped up. He had a big play for the Eagles yesterday. But it would be nice to have some excitement about guys that Vrabel has some connections to moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I fully expect him to bring in some guys. Right after Bond's interception, I went and searched his name in our chat, and I was like,
Yeah,
I know I love this guy. Like I remember loving him.
Wisconsin,
And
right?
yes,
I
so
think he.
Nebraska, one of the two. Excuse my dog wanting to go outside. But obviously we talked about Zach Bond, who's certainly an option. I just want to see an aggressiveness this year. Again, they need to be smart. You don't just like blow money to blow money. But on a positive note, the Patriots were, I believe, ninth in cash spent given out last offseason. And they didn't really sign anybody in free agency. Anyone overly notable, obviously. So there's plenty of room to add to this team. Kraft seemingly, at least based off last offseason, is spending a little bit more cash. And, yeah, it was on a lot of your own players, but, spending is spending. Like,
Yeah.
it's about what's coming out of his pocket. And we can go back to like part of the reason of all that too, in why they re-signed some guys. I think it would, in their minds, it was a little bit easier to help Mayo transition, is if he has a good core of guys that he already knows, which makes obvious sense. If you're having him come in and it's on top of that, it's a whole new group of players that he doesn't even know. It makes things even a little bit more difficult. So I think they focused on trying to keep the guys that are pretty good. Unfortunately, Stevenson had a little bit of a down year. Duggar wasn't that great this year. And things obviously didn't work out. But Vrabel obviously doesn't know basically anyone here. So it's a wide open scenario where they can add virtually anybody to the table for them. And so I'm excited. I think it's an off season where, last year, the last 2 years, the arrow has been pointing down. After the Patricia and Max season, the arrow was pointing down. After Max last off season, things weren't exactly pointing up. We were excited to get a quarterback, but like the arrow wasn't really pointing up that much. Now I think you're saying, okay, we got the quarterback, we got the most important piece, which is the quarterback, and now we're adding a proven, experienced coach that we know brings a good floor to this team and that can do the job at the NFL level. So, yeah, like you said, I'm excited. This is the first time in terms of like I see a window to being good again. And that's going to still take time. They're not going to do it overnight, but you should be a little bit of excitement, a cautious excitement if you're a Patriots fan. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, cautious optimism. It's a theme of mine. But certainly, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And you touched on this earlier about Vrabel being a Bill guy, and I agree to an extent. And here's where I'll go with this: is
hold on 1 sec. He's not in the coaching tree.
No, 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 no.
Very clear for the people on Twitter. He is not in the Belichick coaching tree.
No,
he just has a similar like approach to the game.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to touch on is players who become coaches tend to emulate the coaches they learn from. Style, preferences, things they don't like to do, buzzwords, things like that. Like that's where I get Bill vibes from Vrabel is because he talks about, players like being respectful of each other, respecting the game, respecting their teammates, respecting the opportunity to even play football. I know, it's something like 4 years is like the average NFL player's career. So, not taking advantage of the fact that you're a professional athlete, earning the right to be there, everyone, I think Vrabel said something to the effect of, everyone's going to be given the opportunity. It's just, the guys that go out there and earn it are going to be the ones who get to play and take advantage of the opportunity presented to them. That they're not going to be sticklers on the opportunity, but it's who's going to step up and take it. And that's where I get the Bill vibe. It's not he's going to be this grumpy old curmudgeon of a man behind the microphone. Like we're definitely going to get some good press stuff. I know this was kind of it was an introductory press conference, not a typical Vrabel press conference. If you were to go back and look at his time in Tennessee, he certainly had, and not in a bad way, not a like, oh God, look, Mike Vrabel's on the mic, like watch out. But he certainly gives good press conferences. He holds his players accountable. And so that culture piece, which is a buzzword, and I feel like it gets overplayed from time to time, but it's certainly important that if you're going to instill a certain atmosphere and environment within your organization, within your program, you really have to find guys who buy in and want to emulate, foster that environment, and create the culture of holding each other accountable. Players only get better when, if somebody does something wrong, a player gets up in their face and they're like, get your shit together. Like, this isn't acceptable. Like, this is not Patriots football. And that's where I get the Bill vibes from Vrabel. Not that he's going to be the same coach, but Vrabel is going to coach how his players, how he was coached by Bill and Crennel and
how he played.
Right. And
like,
and right,
that was him as a player.
Correct. He came from the Pittsburgh Steelers, hard-nosed defensive team. I'm not going to pretend to know who the defensive coordinator was for the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the late 90s when he was drafted. But that's who he was as a football player. And so, I think that because that's how Bill coached him, that's the atmosphere he's going to emulate as a coach. He's going to say, like, these are non-negotiables, and if you can't get with that, then you're either out the door or you're not, like, we're not going to offer you a contract. That's really where the Bill vibe ends. Mike Vrabel is a different person. He's going to be 50 this year, so he's certainly closer in age to these guys. I think Bill was roughly the same age when he got hired, because Bill's 72, 73 now, or 74, and we hired him 24 years ago, right? So roughly the same age. But it'll be nice for the the atmosphere in the building to feel different, and that, you know, hard to say one way or the other, but if Mike Vrabel was on this team last year, Matt Judon doesn't pull the same shenanigans with Vrabel that he pulled with Mayo, because Vrabel never would have allowed it. You
Yeah,
know,
well, and
I mean,
that. Go
and
ahead.
that's what I was just gonna say is I think that, you know, players are gonna find out real quick that the game owes them nothing, which is an unfortunate reality for some players that, you know, they think that, you know, their talent is just to such a level that they can just walk through the door and have a starting gig, or, you know, or a primary role, you know, on one side of the ball. But, you know, it'll be nice for the, you know, the atmosphere, the environment, the culture to change. Um, and that's the biggest thing for me, with going from Mayo to Vrabel is, you know that you're going to get that with Vrabel, and we didn't know what to expect with Mayo, and, you know, we found out relatively quickly that he tried to be too buddy buddy, and then by the time he figured out that that was a problem, it was too late.
Yeah, and you know, we obviously saw it with, you know, a lot of these players were around Belichick, so adapting to Vrabel won't be too big of an issue, I don't think. But you're going to get the players like Jalen Polk and you know, Javon Baker and stuff like that that maybe, you know, came into the NFL and they were able to get away with things that they probably shouldn't have got away with, and they're going to be in for maybe a rude awakening.
Yep.
Keishawn Booty has obviously been way more vocal this year than he was the prior year. Obviously, he's playing now more, so I guess that's
Yep.
part of it. But he's gonna, you know, learn to shut his trap. I guess the nicest way to put it.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think the biggest one. I mean, just you brought up wide receivers. I think the biggest person that's gonna the person that's gonna get the biggest dose of reality is Javon Baker,
yeah,
because
I mean, I like what he kind of said at the end. Like he seems to be saying the right things lately. But yes, I mean he's, you know, his antics that he had in college and early into his Patriots career
they're
were,
they're over. They're not gonna fly anymore.
yeah, exactly. I think Jalen Polk might be in for the, you know, probably the most rude awakening. He obviously had had a lot of struggles here in his rookie season. Uh, and he was moderately vocal about it. You know, he called himself one of the best route runners in the league and like stuff like that. And then you go out and you're dog shit all season like that. That's not a good look. You're on social media throwing up random bullshit on your story like for attention.
Yep.
That's, you know, he's going to put his foot down. And you know, I know a lot of people want this offensive guru and stuff like that. The truth of the matter is we don't know what Ben Johnson will bring. I was fine with taking that chance because he's been that impressive as a play caller. But for all we know, he could be a Mike McDaniel, a Zach Taylor, a like, you know, one of these offensive guys where it kind of seems like they're really just suited to be an OC, and they could be a really good OC, but like maybe they're really not meant to be a head coach and lead a team. Uh, Again, we don't know that about Ben Johnson, but it's entirely possible. So, and that's why I was okay with going the Vrabel route, is because we know what we're going to get in him. And
Yep.
obviously to kind of wrap this all up and like that's the plus of what we're going to see going forward is, you know, that there's a floor. You know what you're going to get from Mike Vrabel. You know that he has experience here. You know he's going to keep players accountable, and he's going to set the standard here of what's going to take to get things like to get them back on track. So you know they could go into they could go into the season with the exact same roster as last year, and you're going to feel more comfortable because you know he's going to set that standard for the team, and you know that they're going to be a better team just compared to last year, just based off the coaching staff. And you know, obviously, we'll see where how the rest of the coaching staff fills out, but that's the biggest difference we're going to see. Obviously, we both were okay with giving Mayo a shot, but it didn't work out, and now we got someone that we kind of already know what we're going to get, and it's a smart coach, it's a tough coach, it's a guy that is willing to put in the work, literally put in the work, like physically. The guy puts on pads, these blocking pads, and starts going with the players up against them. Uh, and we're going to just see accountability, and that's one thing that lacked, I think, big this year, especially compared with during the Belichick era. And I just want to see that brought back into the picture, and then hopefully, uh, they find a good offensive coordinator and can help Drake May. And just to finish this up, uh, this whole talk that you need in a offensive coach to be successful is extremely stupid. 4 out of the 8 coaches in the playoffs that are remaining are defensive coaches. 6 out of the 8 don't call offensive plays. If you include Dan Campbell and John Harbaugh, 6 out of the 8 don't call offensive plays. And Harbaugh was a special teams guy. And I don't view Dan Campbell as like some offensive guru either, regardless of if he's an offensive guy or not. Uh, but this narrative that you need an offensive coach for a quarterback to be really good is just factually false. Lamar, our 2 highest MVP candidates is who? Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. What do they have? Neither of them have an offensive coach. You look at CJ Stroud.
Yeah,
He had a
their
little,
head coach is not an offensive-minded guy.
yeah, CJ Stroud, he had a little bit of a sophomore slump this year, but overall he still looked pretty good. Defensive head coach. You have there's also Nick Sirianni, who also does not call plays in Philly. I forgot about him. And they're still alive. And then you go around and the fact that you think that you need an offensive coach to win is just flat out wrong. You can win. People kept saying, 10 out of the last 16 or 12 of the last 16 have been offensive. Yeah, because there's 2/3 of the league is offensive coaches right now. Like, obviously that's going to lead it. And never mind the fact that, like, when you combine that with Patrick Mahomes, who has made 4 out of the last 5 Super Bowls, like, obviously, like, those numbers are going to be there, and they're going to be a little bit flawed. Um, just as a whole, the reality is this: the goal is to have a good football coach. A good football coach. Being a good football coach goes way beyond on the field shit, and we've seen that constantly. Josh McDaniels is one of the most respected, qualified candidates for a head coaching job possible when he took the Raiders job. What happened? It was straight dog shit. Straight dog shit. You know why? Because
Yep.
he doesn't know how to handle the job as a head coach. And then you have a guy like Dan Campbell, who he's not some guru, but he knows how to lead men. He knows how to set the standard of how they're going to play. And that's why it's working in Minnesota. Obviously, they've added a lot of talent as well, but that set the standard there that it's going to work. That's why John Harbaugh works in Baltimore. He set the standard. He was a goddamn special teams coordinator, like a special teams coordinator. Like, not offense, not defense. He had no heavy influence on either side of those balls. And he came in and he's been there for the last decade plus, excuse me.
Yeah.
Get a good football coach. That's the start of it, and go from there. And once you get the good coach and the good quarterback, things can work out well. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, 2 of the best quarterbacks in the league, have defensive coaches, and they're doing just fine. In the end, you know what wins football games the most is a good quarterback. So if Drake May is really that good, I think he'll be okay. And my final words is, if you bitch that Alex Van Pelt didn't deserve credit for Drake May's development, don't explain to me why Drake May needs an offensive head coach. I heard the same bullshit. Drake May would have developed no matter what, even without Alex Van Pelt. He doesn't deserve credit. Well, that means then he would be great without an offensive head coach too, because he's supposedly already that great. If you believe you have a special talent, the guy's going to be a special talent regardless.
Yeah, and my final note on the Mike Vrabel thing is, certainly, it feels like we have the good head coach. We talked about this last offseason, is that the goal is to get a good coach, and we thought Mayo could do it, we just didn't know, but we know Vrabel can do it, so we know we have the good coach, and now it's about putting a staff around, having a staff on the field and on the sidelines who can help with creative, offensive stuff, helping Drake May, putting points on the board, winning football games, and then changing the attitude of the defense. To have pride in what you do, and that it's not just going through the motions. I get it. The roster is not in a great spot, but you know, good coaches, great coaches, you can maximize the output of their players, which was Mayo's downfall. Certainly, is Vrabel's strength. So it's nice. We have the good coach. So now build around the roster, add to the roster, and then I know we talked last year that they were really building for 2025, and you know not to move the goalposts, but it's probably more like a 2026 only because they pushed the reset button at the coaching position and they didn't make the strides that we had hoped that they were going to make in 2024.
For the roster.
But right, and I think that with the right moves, I think this could be because we have the coaching staff in place, and the right guy running the show. I think this, with the right moves, this could be a fringe playoff team in 2025.
Yeah, they absolutely. I mean, like you go and add, they have the money, they have the high draft pick. It's entirely possible that this team is a 7, 8, 9 win team next year. Could they be even better theoretically? Yes, because if Drake May really does take off, obviously a quarterback can kind of carry a team to an extent.
Yeah.
But I think as of right now, like we talked about, Vrabel would have probably had this team around 5 or 6 wins. So if you add more talent and the fact that, I don't look too much into the schedule, but next year's schedule certainly doesn't look very difficult. Obviously things change, so I don't look too much into it, but they have the window to make a big jump this year from a 3-win team and like you said, to be maybe even a fringe playoff team. Or we saw the Chargers just went from 5 to 12 11 wins.
And all they did was, I mean, I shouldn't say all, but the biggest difference was they added a quality coach and they filled out the roster with complementary pieces. I know that his
They
stats
lost
weren't
Keenan.
they
They
lost
lost
Keenan
Eckler.
Allen and Mike Williams, who was up and down, but still if Mike Williams was on this team, he would be the most talented wide receiver they have. No disrespect to Lad McConkey, but Lad McConkey was the 10th had the 10th most receiving yards of any player in the NFL this year, and
Oh
ninth amongst
God, I
wide
hate that
receivers,
we didn't take him.
and ninth amongst wide receivers because Brock Bowers was ninth in the NFL in receiving yards. So, given that there was a lack of weapons, like the Chargers went from a 5-12 record to 11-6 with really their biggest additions being Jim Harbaugh and Lad McConkey. I mean, I'd have to go look at their
And
first.
not
I'm
only
sure that.
that, it's Lad McConkey replacing Keenan Allen, who was a really good football player. Like,
Correct.
and so it's entirely possible that they can put up 7, 8, 9, 10 wins next year. I mean, obviously we'll judge things, in as we get closer to the summer and stuff like that when free agency and the draft's over. But the window's there for them to take a big jump this year. And I think that's kind of the expectation at this point.
Yep,
So,
I agree.
we'll leave it there though. This was obviously a good episode. We have an entire episode, hour and
18
18
minutes
minutes
on
of
just Mike Vrabel,
yeah, basically, and
more
the
or
future of
less.
the Patriots. Yeah, we'll be back obviously next week. Hopefully, I said this last time, but I think the Red Sox might make a deal finally. Like this whole Bregman saga and all that, we'll certainly get into down the road. It's got to end soon. I think that the Sox are just waiting him out because they know he wants to be in Boston. But any final thoughts?
No, I mean certainly, we've turned the first page of the Patriots offseason. It was quicker than I initially probably would have wanted, but we got the guy that we deserved, the guy that we needed to run the show. So we've turned the first page, and you know, couple things to wrap up, and then obviously we're humming through the first playoff weekend wraps up tonight. Go Vikings. But I think that the next big thing, post Super Bowl, which is less than 30 days away, will be, I think, March 16th, if I'm not mistaken, is the official start of the
Tampering period.
2025. The tampering period. The league year is like the first week of March, and then legal tampering is usually middle of the month. And then, hopefully we'll see some big names coming to Foxborough and, a return to prominence, because I'm sick of seeing the Buffalo Bills run the division.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for listening, Matt. Ben here. We're Raise the Banner. Thanks for listening.
Have a good night.